I want you to understand something about a ceasefire before I tell you what Ukraine just offered Russia. A ceasefire is not always a sign that one side has run out of options. Sometimes it is offered only after that side has demonstrated exactly how much damage it can continue to cause. The offer is not made because pressure has failed. The offer is made because pressure has created something worth negotiating over. That distinction is the key to what is happening in the Black Sea right now. Ukraine has reportedly sent Russia a proposal through a third party. The proposal is simple in principle. Both sides would stop attacking civilian vessels and civilian targets in the Black Sea. Ukraine was still waiting for a response when the offer became public. Moscow said it had received no formal proposal, although Russian officials acknowledged that informal suggestions had circulated through different channels. So there is no agreement yet. No ceasefire has entered force. No protected corridor has been announced. No inspection system has been established. Ships and ports remain exposed, and the war at sea continues. But the proposal matters because of what came before it. Russia has spent weeks intensifying attacks on Ukraine's ports, cargo vessels, electrical infrastructure, and the export routes around Odessa and the Danube. Ukraine answered by expanding attacks on Russian shipping, tankers, the Sea of Azov, and the port of Novorossiysk, where naval facilities and grain terminals were struck. One major Russian grain terminal halted operations while damage was assessed. Ukraine's agricultural exports in the first half of August fell approximately 76% compared with the same period a year earlier. Russia, the world's largest wheat exporter, also saw operations disrupted at one of its most important Black Sea gateways. Grain prices reacted. Ship owners reassessed risk. Turkey called for a halt to attacks on commercial shipping. And then Ukraine offered a deal. Stop attacking the civilian ships and ports that keep Ukraine's economy alive, and Ukraine will stop attacking comparable Russian targets. That is not surrender. It is an attempt to convert military reach into political leverage. Stay with me, because once we examine why commercial shipping matters more than the number of warships on the map, how Ukraine created vulnerability without a conventional navy, why Russia has reasons both to reject and to accept this offer, and how Turkey could become the indispensable broker, you will understand the real significance of the proposal. Ukraine is not offering to give Russia control of the Black Sea. It is asking Russia to decide how expensive the Black Sea war should become next. Let us begin with geography, because every negotiation in the Black Sea starts with the map. Ukraine's major ports around Odessa face the northwestern Black Sea. Before the full-scale invasion, those ports connected Ukrainian farms and industry to markets across Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. Grain, corn, wheat, sunflower oil, and other commodities moved by sea because maritime transport can carry volumes that road and rail cannot match at the same cost. Russia occupies the opposite strategic position. Its Black Sea and Sea of Azov ports connect Russian agricultural regions, oil infrastructure, industry, and military bases to international shipping. Novorossiysk is not merely a naval base. It is one of Russia's largest ports, handling grain, oil, petroleum products, and other cargo. The Sea of Azov serves ports linked to Russian agriculture and occupied Ukrainian territory. Crimea sits between these systems as a military platform and logistical hub. That means the Black Sea is not just water between two enemies. It is a shared economic operating system. Ukraine needs it to sell. Russia needs it to sell. Commercial vessels need it to move. Turkey controls access through the Bosporus. Importing countries depend on the cargo. Insurers determine whether the risk is acceptable. A strike against a port can therefore affect farmers hundreds of kilometers inland and food buyers thousands of kilometers away. This is why control of the Black Sea has never been only about naval combat. A navy can win a battle and still fail to create safe commerce. A country can possess more warships and still struggle to guarantee that civilian tankers and grain carriers will arrive on schedule. Merchant shipping depends on confidence. The ship owner must believe the port will be operating. The crew must believe the voyage is survivable. The insurer must believe the risk can be priced. The buyer must believe the cargo will arrive. Break that confidence and trade slows before every ship is physically destroyed. This is the first strategic fact behind Ukraine's proposal. Neither side has to sink every merchant vessel to damage the other's economy. It only has to make the route dangerous enough that commercial actors hesitate. Russia understood this from the beginning of the full-scale invasion. In February 2022, commercial shipping to and from Ukrainian Black Sea ports largely stopped on safety grounds. Mines, blockades, missile threats, and naval operations made ordinary trade extraordinarily difficult. Ukraine could grow grain, store grain, and load grain, but without safe access to the sea, much of that economic value could not reach the world. A grain arrangement signed in Istanbul in 2022 temporarily changed that, creating safe corridors that moved nearly 33 million metric tons of food to 45 countries over roughly 1 year. But Russia refused to renew it in July 2023. Ukraine eventually rebuilt its own corridor without Russian participation, using coastal geography, defensive measures, and the declining reach of Russia's Black Sea Fleet to reopen trade. That recovery was possible because Ukraine had fundamentally changed the naval balance. At the beginning of the invasion, Russia possessed overwhelming conventional superiority in the Black Sea. Major surface combatants, submarines, landing ships, naval aviation, missile platforms, and control of occupied Crimea. Ukraine had no comparable fleet. So Ukraine did not try to build a mirror image of the Russian Navy. It built a different threat. Anti-ship missiles, aerial drones, maritime drones, intelligence, and long-range precision strikes allowed Ukraine to impose risk without maintaining large crewed vessels at sea. The cruiser Moskva was sunk. Landing ships, patrol vessels, headquarters, docks, air defense systems, and support facilities were damaged. Russian naval assets were moved away from Sevastopol or operated with greater caution. Ukraine did not gain traditional command of the sea. It denied Russia uncontested use of it. That distinction allowed commercial shipping to return to Ukrainian ports, even without a formal agreement with Moscow. The same Black Sea Fleet that had threatened Odessa could no longer operate near Ukraine with the confidence it possessed in early 2022. But maritime denial works in both directions. Russia retains missiles, drones, aircraft, submarines, and the ability to strike Ukrainian ports from range. It does not need to park a warship outside Odessa to make the port dangerous. It can attack power supplies, cranes, storage facilities, railway connections, warehouses, and vessels near the harbor. It can generate enough uncertainty to make commercial operators reconsider the route. That is what the recent escalation has done. Russian attacks damaged infrastructure around Odessa and struck Ukraine's Danube port of Izmail. Power was interrupted, port facilities burned, cargo vessels faced increasing danger. Ship owners became more reluctant to send vessels into Ukrainian ports. Rail and Danube alternatives remained available but could not fully replace the capacity and cost advantages of deep-water Black Sea shipping. Ukraine's exports fell sharply. The pressure reaches far beyond the port. Ukraine's agricultural exports are one of its most important sources of foreign currency. Farmers need to sell crops to finance the next planting cycle. Storage fills when ships stop arriving. Local prices fall because supply cannot reach external demand. The next harvest arrives while the previous one is still waiting. A maritime attack can therefore create an agricultural and financial problem months after the explosion itself. Russia knows this. It is why Ukrainian ports are strategic targets. Ukraine's answer has been to create the same kind of vulnerability for Russia. Kyiv expanded attacks on Russian tankers and logistics vessels in the Black Sea and Sea of Azov. Shipping restrictions affected routes that support Russian fuel movements and agricultural exports. Then came Novorossiysk. Ukraine launched a combined attack against the Russian Black Sea port city. Naval facilities and important commercial infrastructure were hit. Reports indicated damage to military vessels and port facilities, although specific military loss claims remained contested and required verification. What was clear was that a major grain terminal stopped operating while damage was assessed. That shutdown created a mirror image of the pressure Russia was applying to Odessa. Russia could strike Ukraine's export gateway. Ukraine could strike Russia's export gateway. This is mutual vulnerability. It does not mean both sides are equal in every military category. Russia possesses greater missile capacity and can launch larger attacks against Ukrainian territory. Ukraine remains more economically dependent on a smaller number of maritime routes. Civilian casualties and infrastructure damage are not symmetrical. But symmetry is not required for leverage. Ukraine only needs the ability to impose a cost that Moscow would prefer to avoid. Novorossiysk matters because it concentrates multiple Russian interests in one location. It is a naval base. It is a grain export hub. It is connected to energy shipments. It supports commercial and military traffic. A successful attack does not harm one isolated function. It forces Russian authorities to manage military defense, civilian safety, shipping schedules, grain contracts, insurance concerns, and international market reactions at the same time. This is the leverage behind the truce offer. Ukraine is effectively saying, if Russia continues to make Odessa unusable, Ukraine has demonstrated that Novorossiysk cannot be treated as safe. That is the deal Putin cannot dismiss easily. Not because Russia lacks the power to refuse. Moscow can refuse. It can continue the strikes, expand them, reject third-party monitoring, or demand additional concessions. The title of this moment is not that Russia has been forced to sign. The point is that refusal now carries a visible price. Let us examine Russia's reasons to reject the proposal first. The Kremlin may believe continued pressure on Ukrainian ports provides greater strategic value than the security of Russian civilian shipping. Ukraine is more dependent on maritime agricultural exports relative to the size of its economy. Russia has more territory, more alternative routes, a larger state budget, and greater ability to absorb commercial disruption. Moscow may also distrust the distinction between civilian and military targets. Ports are dual-use infrastructure. A civilian terminal can sit beside a naval base. A commercial vessel may carry fuel, industrial material, or cargo with indirect military value. Any agreement would therefore face a definition problem. What counts as a civilian target? Would oil tankers serving the Russian economy be protected? Would a grain terminal adjacent to naval facilities be covered? Who would investigate a disputed strike? Russia may also resist an agreement that appears to reward Ukrainian pressure. If Moscow accepts soon after Novorossiysk was hit, Kyiv can argue that its maritime campaign created the concession. That narrative matters politically. Finally, Russia may calculate that time favors continued escalation. If ship owners avoid Ukraine faster than they avoid Russia, the economic balance may still benefit Moscow even while Russian ports face occasional disruption. Those are serious reasons to refuse. But Russia also has serious reasons to consider the offer. First, Novorossiysk is too important to expose casually. Russia can strengthen defenses, but no defense guarantees complete protection against combined waves of aerial drones, maritime drones, and missiles. Second, Russia's commercial shipping network is already under pressure. Sanctions have pushed Moscow toward older vessels, complex ownership structures, flags of convenience, and a shadow fleet already paying a premium to keep cargo moving. War risk adds cost to a system already strained. Third, Russia is the world's leading wheat exporter. Disruption at Novorossiysk affects not only domestic business, but Russia's claim to be a reliable supplier to the global south. Fourth, escalation can spread beyond the control of both sides. A damaged commercial vessel can drift, sink, spill fuel, or create casualties among crews from neutral countries. Romania has already scrambled aircraft during regional attacks. Turkey has direct reason to prevent a wider maritime crisis. And fifth, a limited truce could protect Russian trade without requiring a broader peace settlement or territorial concession. Russia would not have to recognize Ukrainian claims over occupied territory. Ukraine would not have to abandon its military campaign on land. They would agree only that certain civilian vessels and facilities would not be attacked. That is the attraction of a narrow agreement. But a workable deal requires more than two public promises. It needs definitions, communication, verification, and consequences. A list of protected ports or geographic zones would have to be established. Vessels might need to register cargo, routes, flags, and expected arrival times. A neutral body would need to receive complaints and investigate violations. This is where Turkey becomes indispensable. Turkey controls the Bosporus and the Dardanelles, the maritime connection between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. It is a NATO member that maintains relations with both Kyiv and Moscow. It hosted the previous Grain Coordination Center in Istanbul. Turkish officials have already called for a moratorium on attacks against commercial shipping. Ankara has both diplomatic experience and direct national interest. Black Sea instability affects Turkish shipping, insurance, food prices, coastal security, and regional influence. A major accident or uncontrolled escalation would unfold in Turkey's immediate maritime neighborhood. A new agreement would likely be narrower than the 2022 arrangement. It may focus on vessels carrying food. It may cover defined civilian terminals. It may exclude military ports and sanctioned oil traffic. It may begin as a temporary moratorium rather than a comprehensive legal arrangement. Those details will decide whether the proposal is real diplomacy or only a signal. For now, the signal itself matters. Ukraine is telling Russia, Turkey, shipping companies, and global food buyers that Kyiv is prepared to limit its own target set if Moscow does the same. That positions Ukraine as the party publicly offering protection for civilian trade while preserving its right to strike military targets. It also puts Russia under diplomatic pressure. If Moscow rejects the offer and continues attacking civilian shipping, Ukraine can argue that Russia chose escalation over food security. If Moscow accepts discussions, Ukraine can claim its strikes created leverage. None of the choices is cost-free. That is what leverage looks like. Now consider what the proposal means for Ukraine. Kyiv also faces a difficult choice. Its maritime drone campaign has been one of its most successful areas of asymmetric warfare. Restricting attacks on civilian vessels could reduce pressure on Russia's fuel logistics, sanctioned shipping, and export revenue. Ukraine would need to ensure that a truce did not give Russia a protected commercial shield behind which military logistics could operate. It would also need credible consequences for violations. If Russia used a pause to restore port infrastructure and then resumed attacks, Ukraine could lose both time and leverage. But Ukraine's immediate economic need is severe. Agricultural exports finance the state, support millions of livelihoods, and make room for future harvests. Protecting predictable maritime access may be worth limiting a category of strikes, especially if military vessels, naval bases, and clearly military infrastructure remain outside the agreement. This is the bargain Ukraine appears to be testing. Trade restraint for trade restraint. Civilian protection for civilian protection. Predictability in exchange for mutual limitation. It is not peace. Russian forces would continue occupying Ukrainian territory. Missiles and drones could continue striking targets elsewhere. Ground combat would continue. A Black Sea truce would address one theater and one category of target. But limited agreements can matter precisely because comprehensive peace remains unreachable. Every protected ship carries cargo. Every functioning port supports workers. Every reliable voyage lowers insurance costs. Preventing one area of the war from escalating does not solve the war, but it can reduce the damage while larger negotiations remain blocked. Here is the assessment I want you to take from this moment. Ukraine's Black Sea campaign has entered a new phase. The first phase was survival, preventing Russia from using naval superiority to isolate the country completely. The second was denial, striking the Black Sea fleet and forcing it to operate farther from Ukrainian shores. The third was commercial recovery, reopening a shipping corridor without Russian permission. Now comes the fourth phase, converting maritime pressure into negotiated protection. The proposal asks Russia to recognize a reality Moscow tried to prevent. Ukraine has a vote in what happens on the Black Sea. It has that vote not because Russia granted it, but because Ukrainian missiles and drones made Russian assets vulnerable enough that Kyiv's restraint has value. That is why Putin cannot easily dismiss the offer. He can reject it. But rejection means accepting continued danger at Novorossiysk, continued risk to Russian shipping, higher commercial uncertainty, pressure from Turkey and food importing states, and the possibility that the next Ukrainian operation causes greater damage than the last. He can negotiate. But negotiation allows Ukraine to argue that a country without a conventional fleet forced Russia to discuss limits in waters Moscow once dominated. He can delay. But delay preserves the same uncertainty the agreement is designed to remove. Every option concedes something. That is the dilemma Ukraine has created. Let me leave you with something simple. In 2022, Russia entered this war believing naval power gave it control of the Black Sea. Russian warships could threaten Odessa. Russian missiles could close ports. Russian forces could determine whether Ukrainian grain reached international markets. Ukraine did not answer by building a larger navy. It answered by making large ships unsafe, distant bases reachable, and commercial ports vulnerable. Sevastopol became dangerous. The Sea of Azov became contested. Tankers became targets. Novorossiysk, the port Russia used as a safer alternative, was struck and forced to assess damage to military and commercial infrastructure. Now Ukraine has placed a proposal on the table. Stop attacking civilian ships and ports, and Ukraine will do the same. The offer does not erase Ukraine's vulnerability. Odessa remains exposed. Izmail can be struck. Ukrainian exports have already suffered severe damage. Russia retains greater long-range firepower and can continue inflicting enormous costs. But the offer proves that vulnerability is no longer one-sided. Russia can hurt Ukraine's economy. Ukraine can hurt Russia's economy. Russia can make the sea dangerous for Ukrainian trade. Ukraine can make the same sea dangerous for Russian trade. That mutual danger is the foundation of the proposed truce. Ukraine is not asking Russia to show mercy. It is asking Russia to calculate. What is Novorossiysk worth? What are uninterrupted grain exports worth? What is predictable tanker traffic worth? What is the political cost of refusing a limited agreement while global food markets are watching? Putin may still decide that continued escalation is worth the price. But for the first time in this phase of the maritime war, Ukraine has made the price visible before the next attack arrives. That is the real offer, not peace in the Black Sea. A choice about how much more both sides are prepared to lose there. Ukraine built that choice with missiles, drones, and the refusal to accept Russian control of the sea. Now Russia has to decide whether restraint costs less than the next strike. Stay with us. There is more to come.